Eurovision Song Contest. Eurovision Song Contest, Into the Fire of Flames, or whatever the extra little tag is, that really doesn't matter, is the newest Will Ferrell movie that was released on Netflix. To be honest, I am not a huge fan of what Netflix is putting out for movies. I feel like most of the time they're misses. They have unique concepts or ideas, but they're executed in just a very tone-deaf, boring way. I feel like this movie is no different. I'm actually kind of I'm a fan of Will Ferrell's work in some ways. I feel like in general he has some funny moments, but I feel like he has a very specific sense of humor, and he kind of does the same jokes over and over again in some ways, or that same style of humor that it's just like, oh, like, they kind of hit the same, like, every movie he does hits the same jokes every time in different ways. You know, the scenario is different, but the way the jokes are handled are about the same. Because of this, I feel like Will Ferrell movies are most of the time pretty not interesting to watch. A lot of times they aren't, they're not funny, you know what I mean? Like, throughout this movie, I laughed maybe 3 or 4 times. And it's not like a belly laugh, it's more of like a light chuckle that's like, okay, there's humor there, but is it funny? Like, I mean, I get the joke, but it's not really that funny. That's kind of the biggest, like, downside you could say to a comedy. It's like, if it's a comedy and you laugh 3 or 4 times, that's not a good sign for me. I feel like this movie was too long for its own good. I think it was almost 2 hours. Maybe it was a little more. This movie should have been about 1.5 hours at most. It could have probably been an hour and been fine, but there was a lot of filler. There was a lot of it just dragged.
It's like this much shit!
I know!
I can maybe take this much shit, but it's up here!
The first part of the movie was like a serious setup for it. They have kind of like a serious backstory behind it. And then he gets to a point where he's older, and it's kind of funny seeing him, you know, in his dad's basement playing songs, and Will Ferrell's got a funny accent, ha ha ha. But like, in general, it's not very entertaining to watch. It's trying to tell the story first and tell jokes second, which I think for a movie like this, nah. It needs to tell jokes first and a story second. I would rather a movie that makes me laugh and make no sense than a movie that, makes sense but isn't very funny or isn't entertaining to watch. Because the overall story of this movie is not very good. It's pretty generic. It's pretty much like, oh, you can expect what's going to happen pretty much. But it's also got some weird, like, nonsensical stuff in there. Like, it kind of reminds me of, like, I think he used the Anchorman formula a little bit. Like, Anchorman was actually a funny movie. Like, that movie was legitimately funny throughout most of it. But then they have the section at the end, like, the middle part where they're just like, let's just make some weird stuff happen. Or maybe that was Anchorman 2. Whatever it is, there's the thing where, like, it's been a while since I've seen, you know, where weird stuff happens in it. And it's just like, oh, it's a comedy, though. Like, an alien coming in and shooting him doesn't really, you know, seem out of place because it's funny. But in this movie, I'm going to just go ahead and get into spoiler territory because, like, I mean, it's on Netflix. Just watch it or don't. I don't care. Anyway, I'm gonna talk about spoilers now. There's a point in the movie where this guy blows up a boat to kill people to try and stop Iceland from going to the song contest because they can't afford having millions of people there for their infrastructure, because the winner of the contest basically has to host it for the next year, and they're like, oh, we can't afford it. So he blows up the boat trying to kill people to stop them doing it, and it's like, bruh, that's stupid, but whatever. It's fine. The explosion was kind of funny, and then they're just like, oh, we're gonna go, and it's just like, okay. But it just happens in the movie, like, out of nowhere. And then at the end of the movie, he's like, I'm gonna kill you because I don't want you to win. And then he gets stabbed by a fairy at the end of the movie, and it's just like, oh, okay. Like, they try and shoehorn like a villain in there, and it's pretty stupid in my opinion. Like, I don't think there really needed to be one. This movie didn't have it at all. Like, he was just kind of like a jerk throughout the whole movie. But it's just like, oh, now I'm a bad guy for about a good, like, 5 minutes. It's like, I actually killed them. But despite the fact that I don't think anyone was... I know I wasn't questioning why the boat exploded. I just accepted it. It was like, oh, the boat just exploded. Okay. That works out for me, I guess. But then they had an explanation for it. And I was like, okay, I guess. That's stupid, but I guess it makes sense. That's kind of how a lot about the movie I felt was a lot of, like, oh, okay. Another thing that was kind of lame is the way they handled the breakup scene. It's a romance movie, and it's very, very
generic and predictable.
Predictability doesn't always have to be a bad thing, but if, like, you know everything that's gonna happen, it just leaves me feeling not interested in it at all. Like, the whole time, I don't even remember the characters' names. There's some Icelandic names. Will Ferrell's character and the other girl's character are, like, they've been childhood friends, and they kind of have a thing going for each other, but then they're like, oh, we're in a band that causes bands to go apart. Then they find other people, and then they're like, oh, actually, we want to be together because like we don't want to be with anyone else, and it upsets me that you're with someone else, kind of thing. And it's just like, oh, duh, that's what's gonna happen. So of course they get together at the end, and it's just like they have a whole section though where like Will Ferrell goes back to Iceland and then has to fly back up and then jumps up on stage at the last second. Like, oh, okay. I didn't see that coming at all. Like, I literally probably, like, I was bored. The movie felt like it was, like, 3 hours long, and it was an hour and a half, or, like, I was actually, like, the movie felt like it was 3 hours long, but it was probably, like, 2 hours. Like, it felt way longer than it needed to be, and it would just drag and drag and drag, and they didn't tell any jokes. Like, they had some funny moments in there, but it's just like, oh, okay. Like, that's basically the biggest thing I could say about this movie is that it was very generic. It was very boring. It was very not interesting to watch. They had some good parts. The cinematography in it was okay. I like the lighting they did, I feel like. I mean, the shots themselves were probably more on the environments than the actual cinematography, because the environments of Iceland is so pretty. Like, I think that's a beautiful country, and I think that they had that to work with them, is that they're like, oh, Iceland, that's a beautiful country, that we'll have to pick up the slack and just have generic camera angles, because I feel like most of it was just kind of a shot, reverse shot kind of formula, and it just wasn't very interesting. They had the typical stage shooting. They shot it like you were at a live event, and then they had a section where the Russian guy was singing, and they did the typical camera whirl around the guy as he's having his big moment kind of thing. It's just like, it was very generic. Like, it's kind of a movie that was like a comedy that wanted to be a drama, but it didn't do either of them well. Like, it didn't know what it wanted to. Like, the movie, I wish the movie would have just known it was a Will Ferrell comedy and just stayed that way. I think sometimes you have actors that can break out and go into serious roles. For the love of God, this was not that movie. Don't see this movie for that purpose. This drama was not very good. It should not have been this way at all. The drama in it was very forced. The comedy in it was very, like, that's the biggest thing about it. This whole movie just felt very, Like, it wasn't terrible. I think it did everything passably, but it just wasn't very interesting to watch. Like, I feel like it's pretty much like a middle-of-the-road, boring movie. And those are the worst, in my opinion. I would rather a movie be just so bad it's funny, or a movie be so good that it's like, it ascends beyond like what other films can be. But I really don't like these middle-of-the-road generic films. And I feel like Netflix puts out a lot of these. Bird Box was another one that I didn't really like that much. A lot of other ones that I've seen. Just Netflix isn't doing very good with their original movies. And this is another one on their list of just generic movies that they're just pumping out to make the streaming service more appealable. But yeah, it wasn't very good. Don't watch it. I mean, you can if you want to, I guess, but I would not recommend it. It's not very funny. It's not very entertaining. I don't think it's worth your time. If you like this review, go check out that subscribe button down below. Click it. Goodbye.